Chapter 2. May 1950. San Francisco. The loud blast of the steamship's horn startled Zoe from her thoughts. The crowd surged around her, the frenzied bustle rising to fever pitch, even though the ship wouldn't depart for another half an hour. "You better get on board now," urged Uncle Yuan. Like his father, a gold miner, Uncle Yuan had worked hard and been successful in business, but he was still very much the typical Chinese man, reserved and courteous, almost to a fault. He took his responsibilities as Zoe's guardian seriously. Too seriously, Zoe thought, annoyed at his anxiety. Around him, she always felt nervous and awkward. She glanced at her watch yet again, and then at the crowd around her, desperately searching. John was always reliable and always on time. He must have been delayed, she thought. But he hadn't answered her calls, not once in the past 2 months. He knew she was leaving, knew when the ship sailed. And now he wasn't there. Obviously, he had given up on their relationship. She was leaving, but he was already gone. Without him, there's nothing for me here. Agony at the thought of losing him, the sorrow of their last meeting, and her longing to share his life and love threatened to overwhelm her. She fought back tears, determined not to lose control in front of Uncle Yuan. "Don't cry." Uncle Yuan's voice was cross and impatient, but his facial features showed concern. "I told you not to trust a foreign man. He probably has a new girlfriend already." Yuan had always been xenophobic, a tendency that only became more pronounced after Zoe had rejected the recommendation to marry his son, who was an excellent chef, but had no interest in Zoe's work. His next words gave her even less comfort. "Don't worry, you'll find a good man in China." Abruptly, she turned her back on him and headed toward the ship. Suddenly, a familiar voice called her name. She spun around, her gaze eager now. John waved and continued his dash through the crowd, his white jacket flapping behind him like a huge butterfly, zigzagging through a field of flowers. When he finally reached her, he was out of breath and red in the face. "Sorry, I'm late." John gasped the apology, longing to sweep her up in a hug, but acutely aware of Yuan's presence. All the disappointment and worry of the past few weeks were washed away in a wave of forgiveness and indescribable happiness. Zoe's shining eyes and smile said everything her suddenly constricted throat couldn't. "How are you, Uncle Yuan?" John greeted him with a polite bow. "Good," said Uncle Yuan, but his smile held no warmth. He turned aside deliberately, refusing to look at John again. In the face of Yuan's disapproval, John reached for her awkwardly. "I'm so sorry, Zoe. I had a meeting with my advisor I couldn't get out of, and he droned on forever. I got here as fast as I could." He glanced warily at Uncle Yuan's back and added, "I couldn't let you go without saying goodbye." He slid his hands into hers, tightening his grip until he was almost crushing her fingers. She stared at him, her forehead creasing with concern at his worried look. "Is everything okay? This is all my fault. I should have talked with you sooner. I know you're angry with me, and I don't blame you." "No, I could never be angry with you. It's just thinking about you leaving, going so far away, makes me uneasy," he said, forcing a laugh as if to play down his fears. He took his bowler hat off and played with it between his hands, which usually meant he was thinking about something important. "I'm sorry I didn't return your calls. I'm scared of the risk, terrified of losing you, worried that you won't be able to get back here." 2 years is too long. You worry too much. I will write to you every day. We can call each other too. But if anything happens to you, how will I know? How can I be there with you? I'll never forgive myself if... John couldn't bring himself to speak his fears out loud. Darling, please don't blame yourself. I'm the one who's being selfish, thinking only about myself and my family, ignoring how it will affect you and our relationship. It's my fault entirely. Tears threatened to spill over anew as she comprehended his fear and regret. His arms wrapped around her. Silly girl, you know I would never blame you. I'm just worried about you. Forgetting all the polite formalities her Chinese parents had instilled in her, Zoe sobbed into his chest. He took a little box out of his coat pocket and said with another sideways look at Yuan, I think I should give you this ring now instead of on our wedding day. I know it's not ideal. We should have a proper ceremony, or at least the right atmosphere for this moment. But I can't wait. She gazed at him, speechless, her cheeks still wet but her eyes bright. For a dreadful moment he took her silence as refusal, and he stammered, Darling, I'm sorry. I guess I should have asked you about it first. If you don't like it... She stilled him with a gentle touch of her fingers on his lips. The spotless white gloves smelled of her fragrance, and he clutched her hand, drinking it in, sure he would never see her again. He had to strain to catch her words. How silly you are now. Your love is killing me, and you know I can't live without it. She rose on her toes and kissed him. Then give me your hand and close your eyes. She smiled, took off one glove, and held her hand out, eyes closed in anticipation, as he slid the jewel onto her finger. You can open your eyes now. Oh my God, Zoe cried, astonished at the elegant garnet ring. It's so beautiful, so unique. She flung her arms around his neck and kissed him again and again. They clung to each other, oblivious to the crowd and Yuan's hovering disapproval. She looked in awe again at the ring and asked, Where did you find it? It's the ring my father gave my mother. The engraving on the inside of the band, HT to JS, is their initials, Henry Thompson and Julia Shaw. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, both my parents were serving at the naval base there. Mother was in one of the telecommunications centers when the strike began. Father was a doctor, caught up in treating other patients, and by the time he found her, it was too late. The last thing she said to him was that one day she wanted this ring to be on her daughter-in-law's hand. He paused, clasping her hand in his. Do you remember 6 months ago, when Father came to visit me, and we all went out to eat? She nodded, and he continued. Father really likes you. After dinner he gave me the ring and said he wants you to have it. Zoe took a closer look at the ring. The garnet glinted as red as a rose under the bright midday sun, in stunning contrast to the shimmering pearls that encircled it. Overflowing with joy, she kissed the ring gently and then took John's face in her hands and kissed him again. Drawing back in sudden worry, her eyes searched his, and she murmured, Your father will be very disappointed that he won't get to see me wearing it. At least, not for now. I've already told him, and Auntie Lucy. Don't worry, they'll be fine. But I want you to promise me that you will come back and marry me in 2 years. She nodded, laying her head on his chest. I promise. God knows I'm crazy about you, he murmured, leaning down to kiss her. Absolutely crazy. I will miss you more than I can tell. I'll miss you too, she said, flushed and out of breath from the sudden passion. The horn sounded again, and the crush of passengers nudged them toward the ship. White uniformed seamen started their last call. Uncle Yuan frowned with impatience. He picked up her suitcase and said, "Zoe, you must board now." John and Zoe locked eyes, as if they hadn't heard. Then John crushed her in an embrace, dipping her over his knee. She could feel the throb of his desire as he held her close and breathed in her ear. "Darling, I love you. I'll never let you go." "I love you too," she gasped, flushed and barely able to breathe. Reluctantly, he set her back on her feet. She was the woman for him, the only one who made him happy, and he knew he couldn't bear to lose her. "Write to me, please." "Every day, without fail," she whispered. Uncle Yuan interrupted them with urgence. Come on, you will miss the ship." John took the bag from Yuan, put his other arm around Zoe's back, and led her toward the ramp. "Take care. I love you." He kissed her once more before he set her free. "I love you," Zoe mouthed, unable to speak. Then she waved to Uncle Yuan, turned and ascended the ramp. As the ship moved away, John watched her figure on the deck shrink until it eventually disappeared. He had an awful feeling, as if the ship had taken all his happiness away.